Okay, so we're going to get started with exercise 123. I know I messed up the numbering last class, but this is the real exercise 123, not the one from last class, which essentially is going to build a lot on what we did last class. And I'm going to start back with where we kind of finished up last class, and then we'll take it through. And really, this is designed for you guys to learn what's the potential once you have an AutoCAD drawing to make corrections / collage into it / add textures, colors, etc. for presentation drawings. So we're going to add text. We'll try to make this look good. This is very much in line with what you're ultimately going to be creating for your assignment 105s. I will also spend a little bit of time, fingers crossed, teaching you guys how to plot on the two plotters in the back of this room today. I unfortunately can't do it on the screen, so we kind of all have to crowd around because I have to do it in one of the computers at the back of the room. So I'll do that afterward as a separate little mini discussion after we get through some of the basics today. So when I used to, and I'll go back as far as when I was in grad school, a lot of what we did for presentation quality drawings revolved around touching things up in Illustrator. So you do your work in Rhino or in AutoCAD, and you'd ultimately be creating something that then went into Illustrator. You did some collage work on it, and that was your final graphic. When I first started teaching this class, we spent several weeks dealing with just Illustrator collaging techniques. And I've discovered over time that really the bulk of the trend is moving away from Illustrator and into the world of Photoshop and doing collage work in Photoshop. So we will take SketchUp models that you'll start creating very soon and bring them into Photoshop and do some collage work. The truth is that out of SketchUp Pro you can create AutoCAD DWGs, which can drop right into Illustrator, and you can use the same techniques that we're talking about today to collage SketchUp or Rhino or basically any other 3D modeling program. It's just becoming less common, and people are tending to use Photoshop more. So in response to the trend, I will teach you the trend. But everything that I say today is certainly a valid strategy. And if you like Illustrator or feel comfortable working in it, there's absolutely nothing wrong with using Illustrator. And I'll show you these techniques today. So I went ahead and I opened up the same floor plan that I've been using as my example here. I already have set up the layout from last class. Once again, the viewports themselves are all on non-printing layers, which is the way that I wanted them. And I have everything set up to be ready to export. Now, when I go ahead and go to print, or plot as it is in AutoCAD, as long as I have the DWG to PDF.PC3 printer selected, the PDF file that AutoCAD writes contains live graphic information. Okay, and I've already went ahead and done this, but for the sake of doing it, we'll do it again. And I'll make it, go ahead, and it will write the PDF file. It opens by default in Acrobat, which is what you would ultimately be printing from. However, we can take this file and we can open it up in Adobe Illustrator, and I'll do that right now. So let me go ahead and open Illustrator. Notice that if you double-click on the file, it's a PDF. It'll automatically open in the Acrobat Reader, which is normal. So I actually have to open up Illustrator first and then go to File, Open, and let me browse to that file here. And here it is. If I press Control-0, I can see the whole screen here. And one of the unfortunate things is that when it comes into Illustrator, it comes in portrait mode instead of in landscape mode. So we're going to have to adjust that so that we can see it. You don't really have to do it. You can leave it in portrait mode. It's just a little bit harder to see your lines and understand what's going on. We're used to seeing it in landscape mode. So I'm going to show you how to switch it. Illustrator does not work the same way that InDesign does, in that it doesn't actually have a page size or a page setup manager where you can flip this information. Instead, Illustrator uses something called an artboard. And on the left column here, almost 3/4 of the way down, is something called the artboard tool. It looks like a square with little crop lines that go beyond. And when I click on that, you can see that this is artboard 1, and it gives me a dotted line that represents essentially the page size. And so what I'm going to do is up here at the ribbon at the top of the page, I'm going to switch from portrait mode to landscape mode. And I'll go ahead and click on that landscape mode button. and you see that my page size or my artboard changes. Unfortunately, the content doesn't change, so it's still stuck in portrait mode. So after I've established the artboard in landscape mode, I'll come back to my black arrow and I'll select everything. So I'll just do Control A to select all. And I'm going to use the free transform tool, which is the arrow with the rectangle with the little dots, to go ahead and rotate. I'm going to hold down Shift so it jumps, and it will now be right in its landscape mode. So it's a little bit annoying to have to do it, but that's how Illustrator works in terms of pages. They're really just artboards. So now that I have that set up and I can look at it, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on the plan so we can see that a little bit. Okay. So as part of my plan, right, I have some objects that are turning out a bit on the light side here. And so if, for example, I was unhappy with the lightness of these bathroom fixtures, I could select any one of them, and I'm going to do that by using the direct select tool, the white arrow, not the black arrow, and I could select, say, this one. I can take this and come over and adjust my stroke weight here. It's at 0 right now. I could say, no, actually I want it to be 0.25. Right? And that would thicken up that particular line, and you can now see it's darker than the objects that are around it. Okay? So I can make line weight adjustments to my drawing after it comes into the world of Adobe Illustrator. Notice that the thickness or the weight is in points, not in millimeters. AutoCAD does thickness in millimeters, so the translations are not the same. When I said that a wall in AutoCAD was 0.4 millimeters, it's not the same as 0.4 points. Right? So be aware that they're different. So this is something that's visual. Now, it would be really annoying for me to sit here and have to select every single curve and to change every single curve separately. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select one of them, and I'll come up to the Select menu, and I can go to Same, and then I can choose a variety of selections here. It's already black, so I can't say the stroke color, but I can select the stroke weight, because this is the really thin line. So I could say Select Same Stroke Weight, and all of those that are really thin are going to be selected, which is exactly what I want. And I can come over and say, no, actually, I want them to be 0.25 points. And now they're a little bit darker, and you can see them a little bit better on the screen. Okay? So I'm using that trick of selecting the same of something, and I'll use that several times today, to darken up those particular objects as I look at them. Okay? So now, as I start to look at this, I may want to do some other things. Maybe my walls themselves aren't really thick enough. Right? I could go through and I could select my walls and I could thicken them up. But I'm not going to do that for the lines. I want to actually add some fill. And some of you already have fill colors because you did a hatch to fill in the lines. I'm going to do one in the world of Illustrator so you can see how it would be done there. So if I take a second and I look at my layer stack, we can see that I have layer 1, and underneath layer 1, I have 5 what are called clip groups. These 5 clip groups represent each of my viewports that came out of AutoCAD. So I can, for example, find the one that is the plan view, which is here at the bottom, and if I were to turn it off, my plan view goes away. Okay? Likewise, each of these is a particular elevation that I can turn on or turn off. There it is. And there it is. Okay? So what I'm going to do is, before I get started doing absolutely anything, I'm going to take my main layer, layer 1, and I'm going to click on the flyout menu next to my layers menu here, and I'm going to say duplicate layer 1. And by duplicating the layer, I know that I'm now working on a copy that is not my original. And I'm actually going to drag the copy below the original and turn off the original so that I don't accidentally do something. And part of the reason that I'm a big proponent of duplicating the layer is that if you go down a path and something doesn't turn out, if you duplicated the original layer, you can always go back to where you started, which is generally a good practice to have. Okay? So I have my layer 1 copy, and again, I have all of my clip groups that represent each of my viewports. So in this last viewport, which represents my plan view, I want to get rid of the clip mask so that I can actually start to work with these objects. And so I'll have this selected. I'll go to the flyout menu, and I'll say Release Clipping Mask. Okay? Which then releases this set of objects out of the clipping group and into, if I look at it below, a bunch of individual paths. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. Right? See all those paths? There's actually tons and tons and tons of paths that represent all of the lines that are in this particular drawing. Okay? Now that it's outside of that, I can go in and I can start to work with this. And so what I'll do, and I've done this briefly before, and I can point out on the Digital Tools website here, if we go to Tutorials, and we go to Illustrator, and we come down here to, we're ultimately going to do Clipping Mask from Live Paint, but you can also just look at 3.6 Live Paint. Both of those walk through exactly what I'm doing right now, and you'll get a good sense for it later on. So let me open these in a new tab, and I'll come back to them so that you can see them as well. Okay, so I will then select, and again I'm using the white arrow of the direct select, all of my lines that represent my floor plan. If you don't get this kind of a selection, you haven't released the clipping mask yet. So just go back and release the clipping mask. Now that this is all selected, I'll come over to my Live Paint tool, which is hidden underneath the Shape Builder tool. It's right there, Live Paint bucket. I'll select that, and you may have done this as part of your Charlie Harper, but this is repetition again. And I will click to make the Live Paint group. Right? So we'll go ahead and say OK. And it's telling me that I'm not allowed to convert it because I must have something that I'm not allowed to convert as part of this. Let's try selecting it again. Maybe I accidentally selected one of these. And there's Live Paint. There we go. So I think I accidentally selected one of the other views. OK, so now that I have this selected, I can choose, say, kind of a nice grayish color for the walls, maybe, something like that. And I can go in and I can paint in these segments of the walls. Right? Let me zoom in a little bit. And we can come around and we can click and fill in. So essentially, this is just like using the hatch tool in AutoCAD, except that I'm just filling in with some colored regions here. Okay, so that represents a bunch of little colored regions. Oh, one more there. And I've now essentially filled in my walls. And I may or may not like it, but at least I have the walls filled in. Now, one of the things that I want to show you is what about if you wanted to fill in or color in the floors instead of the walls? So I'll use the same Live Paint tool, but instead of picking gray this time, I'm going to pick a different color. And if it doesn't, yeah, it's going to let me pick the color. Sometimes people have trouble getting a color. It's because their color mode here is set to grayscale instead of CMYK or RGB. You may have to flip that if you run into that problem. If you do, let me know, and I'll come over and remind you of where it is. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in all of my floors here with that red color, like that. Okay? And now that I'm done, I've done the gray for the walls, and I've done the red for the floors. So let me do the closets. There we go. Okay? And what I'll do at this point is I'm going to come up to this top ribbon, and I'm going to click on the Expand tool. And what the Expand tool does is it releases these objects to be actual individual objects. And so when I click on Expand, I can now use the direct select, or the white arrow, to come in and select, say, this red region here. Okay? Now, it's reasonable, there's only a few red regions. I could hold down Shift and select all of them, or I can come up to the Select tool and say Select Same Fill Color. And really, this Select tool is very, very valuable if you use multiple colors. So now everything that's red is selected, and I'm going to go ahead and come over and move these red objects onto their own layer. So I open up the Layers window again here. I'm going to create a new layer, and let's rename it to be Floors, or Floors Color, or something like that. Something that's easy to read and easy to understand what I'm meaning by this. Okay? And to move the objects from one layer to another, they're represented when they're selected by the little blue square, or whatever color square it is. I can just drag that square from one layer to another. If I were to turn off the layers copy, you can now see that all I have are these red objects that represent my floor. Okay? I'm going to do the same thing with the walls. So let me come back, turn these on. I'll select one wall. I'll say select same fill color. Gives me, oops, I selected a line, not the wall. There we go. There's the wall. Select same fill color. There it is. All of those are selected. I'm going to create a new layer. We'll call this layer walls. Dash color. And I'll go ahead and change the objects from this layer onto the walls color layer. So there it is. I can now turn off the copy, and all I have are the colored regions that represent, right, the walls and the floors. So at this point, maybe I'll use a fancy hatch or something to be able to fill this part in. I showed you guys way back when we did the swatches that there's a bunch of swatches available on the course website, including a set that mimic the Prismacolor architectural set of markers, which is something that I use fairly frequently. These are designed to be a little bit streaky, as if you colored in the plan by hand, which is part of the look that you're going for. And the colors are really designed to be part of the architectural color palette. They're not really bright colors. And what I'll do is I'll download this. It's right here. I'll download that. I already have it on my flash drive. And just like we did before, I'll go to Swatches. I'll click this little triangle with lines. I'll say Open Swatch Library, and let's open up another library, and that'll be my architectural markers. So let's come down to my resources, and there's the Prismacolor architectural set. Go ahead and open, and they come out in this little drop down. So let me go ahead and select all of the floors, for example. So once again, I'll select one of them and then go to Select Same Fill Color. And I can now choose to fill these in, and I'm going to pick one that's rather dark so you can see what it looks like. Now maybe you can't see the streaks on that. Can you guys see the streaks? No? How about that one? Can you see the streaks? Yes, you can see the streaks, right? So that's what it's designed to have, a little bit of streakiness to it. This is probably a really ugly color for the floors, but I wanted to pick something so that you guys on the screen could see what I was talking about. I'll probably pick something a little bit lighter for the floors, maybe something like this. Right? Again, doesn't look that impressive to you guys. Maybe that one's a little bit better for you on your screen. So it's just a little bit of coloring. Likewise, I could pick the walls, and I could go to Select Same Fill Color. And I could pick one of the sets of walls, right? Something like that. And now I have the walls as a slightly different color than the floors. Okay, so all of this really doesn't look that great until I come back to my layer stack and I turn on my original layer, which I will, and now it underlays behind my line drawing. So it's a subtle thing, but it adds a little bit of texture and a little bit of context that's different than the surrounding topo lines, which is really what I was after as part of this. Okay? Now, maybe this is a bit on the conservative side of I haven't done too much with it, but a lot of times something as simple as this can really enhance your drawing and just give it just a little bit of pop. Okay? Likewise, I may decide, and this is something that you'll need to do as part of your assignment, I may decide that there is too much and I need to edit it out. Maybe I only want the floors to be slightly colored in, or maybe I only want the walls to be colored in. So you want to think about what looks right. For today's exercise, play around with all the options, and even if it ends up looking ugly, that's fine. I'm just trying to explore these with you. Okay? When it's time for the assignment, you don't have to do everything that I'm showing you right now. I'm just showing you these as options. So maybe I would turn off the wall colors and leave those white, and just have the floors stand out a little bit in contrast, which is kind of a nice look. Okay? So let's move over. I'll do this front elevation, for example. And so these techniques I'm going to take a step further with this view. So once again, we'll turn off the line drawings for layer 1 here, and we'll save those for later. I'll turn back on my copy. And this time, I have to look for where the clip group is. I think it's this one. Yep. So I'll select this one, and I'll release the clipping mask. So I'll come down here and release the clipping mask. and it's now its own group. And I can now once again select these and go into my live paint tool and make this a live paint group. So same process as last time. This time I'm going to color in the windows, and we'll pick kind of a lightish blue for the windows, something like that. And I'll go through and I'll fill in where the glass is. Like that. And then I'll pick a gray for where the concrete is, maybe something like this. And I'll fill that in. Like that. And then maybe I'll pick a different color, maybe a brown. For the frames of the windows. So I'll zoom in here. And we'll pick the frames of the windows. I don't have to pick these colors as a realistic set of colors, but sometimes I've found that just coloring in as a semi-realistic set of colors is helpful just to see, oh, that's concrete, this is wood, etc. So let's get these colored in here. Perfect, like that. Okay. So let me press Control- to zoom out a little bit so that we can see it. And now that I'm done with my live paint, once again I'll come back up to this ribbon at the top here, and I'll go ahead and I'll click Expand. So now I have those expanded into their own shapes. And once again I'm going to select these. So we'll start with the concrete, and I'll go to Select, Same Fill Color. There it is. And we'll create a new layer, and we'll call this maybe Elevation Concrete, for lack of a better term. And I will move the gray objects onto that elevation concrete layer by dragging this little box from one layer to the other. And I can confirm that they are in fact on that layer by turning that layer on and off. Let's take the windows next, and I'll go to Select, Same Fill Color. So you can see this is repetitive, right? It's the same process. Another new layer. We'll call this Elevation. Oops. Windows, and we'll move those objects onto the Windows layer. One last, we will select the brown, and I'll go to Select, Same Fill Color. There it is. New layer, and this will be Elevation Frame, Window Frame. Something like that. And I'll move those objects onto this layer. Okay, so now I can go ahead and I can turn off my Layer 1 copy. I have just these objects. And once again, I can turn on my Layer 1, my original layer, which is going to make the lines go over this and kind of make it stand out. Now, to me, these colors by themselves are probably a little bit too dominant. They show up too strong, too graphically. So if I were just leaving the colors, maybe I would select, say, the windows, for example. I'll select all the windows. And then I adjust the opacity down maybe to 30% or 40% or something. So they're not nearly as strong. And I do the same for the other colors. Okay? But that might not be the most realistic set of windows either. And so maybe I want to use a different strategy. And so I'm shifting from just using the live paint now to using one of the other tutorials, which is this 3.15, a clipping mask from a live paint. And there is a video tutorial that will walk you through how to do this particular piece. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to look at my layer stack, and let's turn everything off except for the windows. So everything's off except for all of the objects that make up the windows. Okay? So if I look at these objects, we can see that those are made up by a bunch of paths. For this to work, I need all of these paths to become one compound path. So I'll select all of the objects like this, and I'll go up to Object, Compound Path, Make. And so this is almost the exact same thing that we did in the world of InDesign, right? When we had the various frames and we wanted the one picture to span all of those frames. You guys remember that way back when? Maybe not. It's under Object, same place. Object, Compound Path, Make. And you can see that that big list of paths is actually compressed down into one compound path, which is exactly what I want. So now I need a background image of the sky. And so I already downloaded one earlier today, but I would do a search on the Creative Commons site for something like sky. And I would pick something, right, with some clouds in it or whatever, something like that. Okay? I already have that, so I won't actually download it. And at this point, all I need to do is go to File and Place, and I'll pick the sky. There it is. And we'll drop it in to my drawing. Now this is obviously way, way, way too big, so we need to do some scaling. We use the free transform tool, and we'll scale this down. And it also needs to go behind those objects. I'm holding down Shift, by the way, to keep it in proportion. So once I have it here, I can right-click on the shape, go to Arrange, and Send to Back. Or I could drag the order in this elevation windows layer such that it has the compound path on top of the linked file. That's the critical thing. And so whenever we're going to do a clipping mask, which is what I'm about to do, we have to have a main layer, a compound path, or just a single path, followed by a linked file. There can't be any more to this, the layer stack than this. It's got to be this simple for it to work. Once we have this, with the main layer, the compound path, and the linked file for the image, I'm going to select the main layer, go to my flyout menu here, and say Make Clipping Mask. And it will then clip that image in the background for all of these little squares that are my actual windows. So these look a lot better as windows than just the plain blue boxes did. This is still probably a little bit strong. If I were to turn back on my elevation, those blues stand out a bit much. And what I can do is I can take these blues and I can change the opacity of them so that they're maybe down at like 60%. And now they feel more like they're part of the elevation than they do dominating the elevation. Maybe 60% isn't quite enough. Right? I could select it again, go back, and maybe I'd make it 40%. There's some balance where it looks nice but not too overpowering. And you have to kind of experiment with where that point is. Okay? So I've done it for the windows. I'm going to do it for the concrete, and I'll do it for the frames of the windows, just so that you could see it done. I don't think it's realistic on an elevation that you would do every material, but you could pick and choose maybe just one little piece to emphasize it. In this elevation, as an example, there's an awful lot of glass. So emphasizing that glass may be a good strategy to really understanding what this particular building is about. If you had something where there was a lot of enough different material, you could do it for that material. Maybe if I was doing this elevation, I wouldn't choose windows because they're really small. Maybe I would choose the concrete siding, right, or building structure. So if I was continuing to work on this, let's go ahead and turn off the elevation windows layer. And let me turn on the concrete layer. All right, there they are. And we'll turn off layer 1 so that we have just these left. So once again, if I expand the concrete layer, we see that I have a compound path, but then a bunch of single paths. I need all of these to come together as one. So I will select them, go up to Object, Compound Path, and then Make. And that smattering of different paths and compound paths becomes just one compound path, which is exactly what I wanted. Okay? Now I need to go find an image of concrete. And I don't actually have one of these. So we're going to go back to the Creative Commons search, and I'll type concrete. And I will look for something that looks nice. And something like this might look nice. Might be a little bit close up in texture, but it should work out. So let me go ahead and download this. I'll download the largest size. And let me go ahead and show in my folder, and I'll copy it. And I'll put it on my flash drive into today's exercise. I'll go ahead and paste. There it is. And now I'll come back to my Illustrator file. And once again, I have the compound path. I need the image file, so I'll go to File and then Place. I'll pick the concrete and I'll place. And I need this to be about the right size. So I'll come back to my free transform tool and we'll adjust it so it's just a little bit bigger. Now, what I did last time was I right-clicked on the object and went to Arrange, Send to Back, which is fine. But I want to show you that I can do the same thing in the layer stack, where I can take the linked file and I can drag it below the compound path, and that will adjust the order too. Either way is perfectly fine. Right-click, send it back, or adjust the layers. So now that this is set up this way, I just select the elevation concrete main layer, go to my flyout menu, and say Make Clipping Mask. That will then cut out my building elevation for this little bit of concrete. Okay? Maybe I don't like this little spot that's there. Be aware that I can use the direct select or the white arrow to select the image and then adjust where the image falls so that I can actually kind of get rid of that little bit of black. Okay? So I have that set up. Again, I would probably go to opacity and change the opacity down so that it's lighter. And then we can come back and we can turn on the main line layer, and you can see what it looks like in context. So I've given a little bit of texture to that facade. Okay? Now, I could turn on the concrete and I could turn on the windows, but to me this is starting to get a little bit too much texture. So I'd pick one thing and do that. If you do the windows, that's fine. If you do the concrete, that's fine. If you did the window frames, that would be fine too. Okay? I'm going to leave it for now with just the windows on in this particular piece. Maybe next time I do the concrete texture on this one as an alternate. Okay, so at this point, we may want to go through and start to identify what pieces belong to what pieces on the building. So for example, this view is the north elevation view, right? So it might be time to put some text into this. And so you guys have already been hammered in 121 and or 220 about your font choice and making sure you pick a reflective font to your design. The one thing that I would add to making the appropriate font choice is that everybody always makes the fonts too big. Always. Right? We don't need giant fonts unless they're being part of some kind of an artistic name or something. Right? When you look at this on a computer screen, right, and we use the type tool, and I'll come down here. Let me make a new layer, and I'll call this labels. And let me put it at the very top here so it's on top of everything else. When I create a label, right, and I type, this is the north, I'm going to do it in all capitals, north elevation, right? This looks really, really small. Wouldn't you agree? Okay. But I'm looking at it on a computer screen. Okay. When this gets printed, it's going to be much larger, right? Maybe something like that on screen. So the tendency is always, oh, when I look at my whole drawing, let me make this go away here. Right? Wow, that text is really hard to read. Let me take this text and let me take it from 12 point to 72 point, and I'll throw the north elevation label here. And all right, I can read it. That looks great. Okay? But when we print this out at 24 by 36, right, this is going to be like 1.5 inches tall north elevation. Big block of text. It's really dark, and it draws your eye. Okay? When we're doing these as a presentation document, these don't need to be any larger than what you can naturally read. You write your English paper, and it's in 12 point. Right? Or maybe 13 if you're trying to stretch the length a little bit. Okay? We don't need to make anything too much larger than that. You might want to make it a little bit larger, maybe 18 point, something like that, 14 point, something like that is reasonable. Right? So we pick a reasonable size, we pick a reasonable font. Okay? So in this case, I think this is probably a reasonable font choice and a reasonable font size right there. And maybe I'll take these, right? I'll copy and paste it, and let's put it in here. I'll line them up. And this is not my north elevation. This is my, where am I? North. This is south. This is my east elevation. So I'll say east. We can copy it again. Control C, Control V. We'll drop it down here. This is my west. elevation. And we can take this last piece and I could drop it in as my south elevation. Like that. Okay? So I've added a little bit of text that identifies what these are. The plan is rather obvious, so I don't think you have to do it. Some people believe in putting labels on their plans, right? The alternative to that would be to have furnishings. If you have a bed in a bedroom, there's no need to type on top of the bed and say, this is a bedroom, for example. Okay? So think about why you're using something and whether it really belongs there. I would rather have you have a little bed that's in it or a little dining room table or a kitchen such that it becomes very obvious that this is a bathroom or a bedroom or something like that. Okay? The north, south, east, and west elevations generally are nice to have text because we don't necessarily know which elevation is which. Okay? So I've now put that text on, recognizing that I can change the font to something else if it felt like it was more appropriate to have a different font as part of it. One of the fonts that I use in actual practice is a font called Frank the Architect, which I think is particularly nice. There is a free version of it that you can download. And it looks a lot like a hand set of lettering. It works really nice when you're drawing lots of small things and when it's really small. So if you have like a 10-point or a 12-point font and you have little notes, it looks great. If you're using it for big titles, it's not really the most exciting thing in the world. Okay? And you may be better off picking something else. Again, that's a matter of personal preference as to what you use. If you want something like this, remember you can download it, save it on your flash drive, and temporarily load it on one of these machines to work as well. So now that I have the basic elevations and labels here, right, I might also like to add a few other things. And so there is on the website some things that you can download as extra little bonuses. They're attached to today's exercise. So if I went to today, at the bottom here, it's one of these downloads. I apologize, I haven't logged in. It's a zip file that contains some other stuff. Okay? I've already downloaded it and I've already extracted it, but I can go to the File menu and then go to Place, and I can go find that stuff. I have it under my Resources folder, and it's under Title Blocks and Scales. In Illustrator, you can download all of this as well. There's a title block that's a casual small for 24 by 36 that you can use. All you do is place it into your drawing. We'll say OK. And it happens to be the 24 by 36 size that we need. Notice that it goes in front of all of your drawings, so we can't see the drawings anymore. So this is a point where you'll probably, instead of wanting it to be on the labels layer, you'll probably want to have a layer for it by itself, and then drag that layer to the very bottom of your layer stack so that it doesn't compete. Okay? So with this little title block, it's not really something, you don't tend to put a title block on a presentation drawing that's going to go up, but you might put this kind of a title block on something that you were working on in an office, or for a small project that you were doing for a particular client. You drew a landscape plan, you might need a little title block or something like that. So this is an example of this kind of a strategy. If I zoom in on it, you can see that it has some default information, drawing title, client name, etc. as part of it. If I want to edit this, I can select it, and I can choose to embed it so that it sticks into my drawing instead of being a reference file. As soon as I do that, I'll get a warning that says the font is missing. That's OK. We'll say OK. And then I can come in here, double-click on the drawing title, and there I could change it to be, Yosemite, cabin, or something like that. Okay? And I could change the client name, address, the sheet numbers, and all the rest of it. The spacing's a little bit off because the font is a little bit different. But ultimately, this is providing a little bit of a title block. If you get inside of this group, right, we get a gray bar at the top of the page. I can hit this back arrow until I get all the way back, and I'll see the rest of my drawings. Okay? So I'm going to press Control-0 so that I can see everything. I did include a few other things as part of this, one of which is a graphic bar scale. So I could go to Place, and I could drop this 1/4 inch equals a foot scale right into the drawing. Right, looks like a little bar scale. We could have it placed, whoops, excuse me. Let me lock that so that I don't select it. And we could drop that in relation to one of our drawings as another example. Okay? There is also a drawing note that's available if you wanted that. It's essentially something that you could do very easily by yourself, but I could go to File, Place, and put that in as well. And it looks like a little squiggly line, and you could write a little note. The truth is that you could create this very, very easily by just typing your note. Right? So let me go like this. And again, I'm showing you these not because I'm expecting you to do it. I just want you to be exposed to it. So I could say this is a window, for example, and then I could use the pen tool, and I could draw a nice little arcing line that came down to the window. Let's flip it so that it's filled, and let's go to my, my arrows right here at the end. I want to use that arrow, and now I have a line with that little point on it. Okay? If you don't like the curvature of it, a lot of times the easiest thing to do is to only have one control point like that, and then we can adjust this and say I want it to be curving, and do it as a nice simple sweep. Okay? You don't obviously have to label the window because it's rather obvious. I was just using that as an example for you as well. So let me go to Control 0, and now we can see the whole thing. Okay? Sometimes people like to do creative things relating to the ground plane, and I'll show you this just as an example, not because you have to do it. And this is more for a presentation when you don't have a title block around it. But sometimes people like to actually create a little bit more of a color fill region. Oh, wait, hold on, I have to unlock. All right, so let me go back to my pen tool, and I'm going to come down here. We'll come over. We'll come back up to there. And maybe I'll fill in that with black or some kind of a dark gray. Maybe something like that. And then maybe I'll take this north elevation text. I'll make it white so it stands out. And this might be an opportunity to make this a little bit larger in size because it becomes part of the graphic. So maybe I'll bump this up to like, well, 72 is a little large. Let's do maybe 48 point, something like this. And I'll set this right against that base. Maybe something like this. And that then becomes part of the ground plane. Do you guys see how that works? So on something like this, a little bit larger piece of text may work to your advantage as part of the ground plane and part of kind of how you're establishing what's going on in this particular sense. I think probably it needs a little bit less color so that it's a little bit more subtle, maybe something like this, right, where we can just vaguely see it in context with the ground plane. Okay, so just another example of something that you could elect to do. So today is very much about exploring ideas, playing around with things, seeing what looks right as part of your drawings, learning these techniques to collage, and then we will ultimately be printing this on one of the plotters as your assignment. Now, when you get to the assignment, and I've mentioned this before, don't be afraid to edit things. Right? If you're doing too much, for today, for example, oh, I did the floors and I did the walls, and suddenly I have all this stuff going on. Right? When you turn in your assignment, edit it down. Make it look good. Make it look nice, clean, presentable. That's the big thing. Okay? No giant, large text unless it's part of something like this. Right? Make it small, make it readable, and that sort of thing. Are there any questions to this? I know it's a lot to kind of take in and play around with, but I want to show you this idea that you can work in Illustrator and enhance your drawings. Anything else? No? Okay. So in about 10 minutes or so, after I save this file, I'll go take it back and show you guys how the plotting works in this room. The advantage of using the plotters here is that you don't have to pay the 25 cents that you would otherwise have to pay. The plotters next door work fine, but you have to pay 25 cents to use those. These ones should plot for free, which is the idea. If you were to take, you guys are extraordinarily fortunate to have plotters here. If you were to take this file to Kinko's and have them plot it, you're going to be paying somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 to $10 per square foot. So a drawing like this might cost 60 bucks. Okay, so don't take it there. Use your 25 cents or free option as part of your plotting. Okay? The other thing that I will add relating to your assignment 105, which is due on Monday, is that it has to be posted before class starts on Monday. I would like for you to plot it before then as well, but I will not mark it late if you haven't plotted it. Okay? If you don't plot it and give it to me, you will be docked points, but there's going to be problems with plotting, or the plotter's not going to work, or whatever, and I don't want you to be penalized because of a technical difficulty. Okay? Does that make sense? All right? Okay. So I'm going to turn you loose, and in about 10 minutes, I'll get set up in the back, and I'll show you how to plot on one machine, and then I'll show you how to plot on the other machine.